This was my first trekking experience in Nepal. I've heard about its trekking trails, especially trekking to the Mount Everest Base Camp, and have always wanted to trek there someday. Fortunately, my day hiking buddy in Oahu had been trekking there several times before, and planned for this trip. 3 other folks who Leon met before joined this incredible trekking trip. It was 15 days of trekking, not including the last day of van riding back to Kathmandu. The total trekking specification for the 3 passes, Rinhola, Chola, and Kamala, Kalapadhar, Mount Everest Base Camp, and some side trips was about 103 miles with 32,870 feet elevation gain. Trekking over each pass was amazing, but the highlight was getting to the Kalapadhar at 18,520 feet elevation. Kalapadhar is about 6 miles west of Mount Everest. Here was my flight from Hawaii to Nepal. It was a long flight. Nepal is located in South Asia between China and India. Here is a map of Nepal. It is 1.56 times as big as Indiana, USA. Day 1. We flew from Kathmandu to Lukla. It was about 40 minutes flight for 86 miles of distance. Then, we trekked it from Lukla to Manjo. It was about 9.6 miles with 1,905 feet elevation gain. We were stoked on this first day of trekking. The first 3.3 miles was pretty much downhill, losing about 1,000 feet elevation. Its trail just above the Thado Koshi River was amazing and well maintained. Then, next 6 miles of trail were ups and downs with gentle slopes gaining over 1,000 feet of elevation. We met many trekkers along the way and walked through a few villages before reaching Manjo. Day 2. Trek from Manjo to Namche Bazaar. It was about 4.9 miles with 2,505 feet elevation gain. Looked like it had been drizzling overnight and had heavy rain from 0730 to 0810. We left Manjo around 0830 after rain subsided around 0810. Today's trek was short at 4.9 miles but had a significant elevation gain for the last 2.6 miles, gaining over 2,400 feet. The first 1/4 mile was a downhill, losing 100 feet elevation. Next 2 miles are quite flat, gaining about 90 feet elevation. Then next 2.6 miles are quite steep, gaining over 2,400 feet elevation. The highlights of today's trek were seeing a few mules convoys, the Hillary Suspension Bridge, and the infamous Namche Bazaar village. Sir Edmund Hillary from New Zealand and Tenzing Norgay, a local Sherpa mountaineer, were the first climbers reached the summit of Mount Everest on the 29th of May 1953. Namche Bazaar is the last big town that we can buy whatever we need for trekking. Its people are humble and very friendly. We picked up a couple of bigger bags so that our porters might carry our loads a little easier. After settling in, we walked around the Namche Bazaar town. We came back here again on the 14th day of trekking. Day 3. Trek from Namche Bazaar to Tame. It was about 6.2 miles with 2,100 feet elevation gain. Side trip. Hike to Tame Monastery. It was about 2 miles with 800 feet elevation gain. Morning temperature was not too bad, around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Trail goes up to the west, gaining about 400 feet elevation in 0.8 miles with the wonderful views of the Namche village. Then, it loses 450 feet elevation to Khumbu Valley in less than 2 miles. It has incredible views to the valley. Then, it gains about 1,000 feet elevation in about 3 miles, which is considered a gentle slope. Its trail hugs above the Boat Koshi River and was well maintained. Arriving at Hotel Yak Tame. This was one of rare videos showing almost everybody, that included the porters and 2 guides. After reaching a cozy Tame village and settling down at Hotel Yak Tame, we went to check out the infamous Tame Monastery. This photo was taken on the way up to the Tame Monastery. Its side trip may give us more workouts and acclimated quickly. In overall, it was another excellent day for trekking. Day 4. Trek from Tame to Longdon. It was about 6.3 miles with 2,373 feet elevation gain. Side trip. Hike to a hill next to the Longdon View Lodge in Longdon. It was about 0.9 miles with 675 feet elevation gain. The weekend weather forecast for the Gokyo Lake area, Day 5 trekking, was bad with thunderstorms. Weather for the Tame area was still pretty good with lots of sunshine. Day 4's trek was quite easy, gaining about 2,400 feet in 6 miles. Most of the trails were next to the river. However, we are getting into the places over 14,000 feet elevation. The highest altitude that I had been was the summit of Mount Rainier, 14,411 feet. Surprisingly, none of us was affected by the altitude. Its trail was full of high-altitude vegetation next to the river. When we settled at the Longdon View Lodge, we went for a side hike next to the lodge. Side trip. It was quite steep that gained 675 feet elevation in 0.45 miles. At the top, we were at 15,439 feet elevation. All of us did well. The dining hall. We did not hang out too long, but we turned in early for 04:00 am departure next day. Day 5 trekking over Renhola Pass, which was at 17,867 feet. Day 5. Trek from Longdon to Gokyo Lake via Renhola Pass. It was about 7.9 miles with 3,543 feet elevation gain. We were going to leave the lodge at 04:00 am but decided to stay one more night due to bad weather going over the Renhola Pass. The other, down under, folks left at 05:00 am. So, we also decided to leave as soon as we can. We left the lodge at 06:00. Renhola Pass on the view. As forecasted, there was wintry mix below the Renhola Pass and rained quite a bit on the way down to Gokyo Lake. We all got soaked pretty much when we arrived in Gokyo Lake. It was very windy and sleeting at the Renhola Pass. It was freezing, so we did not stay too long but left immediately. On the way down to Gokyo Lake, I felt fine but still had some dizziness. After a quick meal and taking 2 pills of Advil, laid down for the day. It was my best sleep so far, 9 hours of sleep. Day 6. Rest or acclimation day at Gokyo Lake, 15,584 feet. After the breakfast, we leisurely hiked to Gokyo Lake number 2 and number 1. It was about 1.4 miles with 59 feet elevation gain. I solo hiked the Gokyo Reef, 17,575 feet, which is almost 2,000 feet higher than Gokyo Lake altitude. It was quite steep trail, gaining almost 2,000 feet in 1 mile. It was about 2.4 miles with 1,970 feet elevation gain. Unfortunately, weather was overcast, so there was no views at the top. Well, I knew that when I started to climb up. I felt really good when I came back to the lodge. My solo hike to Gokyo-ri gave me lots of confidence trekking in high altitude. Day 7. Trek from Gokyo Lake to Thangnim. We trekked about 2.9 miles with 743 feet elevation gain. We stayed 2 nights at Gokyo Lake, which gave us some rest. Since we are trekking less than 3 miles, we had lazy mornings starting about 0830. It was little chilly in the morning as the surrounding areas were frosty. We saw a helicopter making runs to transport some trekkers from Gokyo Lake to Lupa. Those trekkers opted to ride helicopter back to Lukla. They came to Gokyo Lake straight on Everest Base Camp route, Namche Bazaar, Derbyshire, Farish, etc. The highlight today was seeing and crossing the Ngozumpa Glacier moraine, admiring its beauty and the places that we've hardly encountered before. The last glacier that I observed was when I backpacked the Wonderland Trail in 2014 in Wa State. Ngozumpa Glacier was far more grandeur than this video. Its width is probably about 1/2 mile, but the trail was slanted and was about 1 mile. We turned in early for next day's adventure, going over the Chola Pass, 17,782 feet in elevation. Trek from Thangnik to Zongla via Chola Pass, 17,782 feet in elevation. It was 6.4 miles traverse with 2,861 feet elevation gain. Most of elevation gain was from getting to the Chola Pass at 17,782 feet elevation. We left Thangnik early morning at 0500 with sunrise at 0552. When we left, it was drizzling and snowing above 16,500 feet altitude. It was a quite miserable day, but could be a winter wonderland above 16,500 feet elevation where it snowed. Since it rained and snowed, there was no views. I was little concerned with whiteout condition above 16,000 feet elevation, but whiteout condition did not happen. And luckily, wind was mild at less than 5 knots. The last 0.5 miles was quite steep. If there was no cables installed, we would need foot tractions and might even get hurt. The cable rails made very easy, especially for the folks coming down. At the Chola Pass at 17,782 feet in elevation. For safety, I used the foot tractions for the half a mile of downhill. When we got to the Zongla Lodge, we were cold and hungry, since we did not have lunch. We devoured the food. I had dal bhat and momos, and turned in early. Day 9. Trek from Zongla to Lobich. It was about 4.4 miles with 940 feet elevation gain. Leaving Lobich, it was probably one of the easiest days of our 16 days of trekking. Unlike the day before, the weather was very nice. We hit the trail around 0800. Its trail started going down 250 feet elevation in 0.5 miles. Just over a mile when we were above the Chola Lake. The views were amazing. Chola Lake, Mount Tabosh, 21,309 feet. Mount Ama de Blam, 22,349 feet. Mount Everest Base Camp Trail, etc. We took our time above the Chola Lake enjoying the sceneries. Trail turned sharp to the north parallel to the Everest Base Camp Trail. It was little windy with 15 to 20 knots, but the views of Mount Ama de Blam, wide valley to the right, and Mount Nuptse, that covered the Mount Everest, were incredible in high altitude area. Once we hit the Everest Base Camp, EBC, trail, we must have seen over 100 trekkers coming down the valley with happy faces. Visiting the EBC must have been a lifetime experience for them like us. We arrived at Hotel Mother Earth in Lobich in just 4 hours, did some laundries, recharged my laptop, and played a Nepali card game called Dumbo. I bought everybody hot ginger tea. It was a nice place to relax at Hotel Mother Earth in Lobich. Day 10. Trek from Lobich to Gorak Shep. Side trip. Hike from Gorak Shep to Mount Everest Base Camp and back. It was quite easy day. We trekked from Lobich to Gorak Shep for 2.8 miles with 1,655 feet elevation gain. After we settled in the lodge at Gorak Shep, we day hiked to the Mount Everest Base Camp, EBC, and back. We left Lobich leisurely around 0800. We were stoked and eager to start since we were going to Gorak Shep and day hike to Everest Base Camp. On the way up to the Gorak Shep on the EBC trail, we've probably seen over 1,000 happy folks on the trail. Arrived at Gorak Shep, we could see the Kala Pathar, the highest point, 18,520 feet in elevation, during our treks. After settling in, we day hiked to the Everest Base Camp. Its trail is the Mount Everest Base Camp Trail parallel with the Khumbu Glacier, 16,100 feet to 24,900 feet, which is the highest glacier in the world. The scenes of the glacier and its surrounding snow-peaked mountains were truly grandeur and spectacular. Alas, it was a big disappointment when we got to the EBC because there was no tents for the climbers. I personally expected lots of tents for the climbers. Well, the climbing season for the Mount Everest was between April and June. There was a rock, I called it EBC Rock, littered with some graffitis and read Everest Base Camp, 17,598 feet in elevation. It was the spot for the trekkers to take commemorative photos. Day 11 started with a side trip to Kala Pathar, which was the tallest at 18,520 feet elevation during our trip. It was 2.8 miles with 1,655 feet elevation gain. Then, we trekked back to Lobich where we stayed the day before. It was about 2.9 miles with 300 feet elevation gain and 1,000 feet elevation loss. It was an exciting day since we will be able to see the Mount Everest, 29,031 feet, the world's tallest mountain. 3. Leon, Song, and Isaac of us started to hike at 0500, sunrise at 0552, with our assistant guide to summit Kala Pathar. Weixin and Dee did not go because their oxygen levels were below 60s.
It was quite cold with some frost on the ground. After 0.2 miles of flat trail, it started to climb, gaining 1,650 feet in 1.3 miles, with altitudes from 16,943 feet to 18,520 feet. I felt great but felt tired around 17,000 feet altitude. I was breathing heavily every 3 to 4 steps. At the Kala Pathar, it was quite amazing to see the peaks above 20,000 feet. Mount Everest, 29,031 feet. Mount Lhasa, 27,940 feet. Mount Pumori, 23,494 feet, etc., and the Khumbu Glacier. Here was our commemorative photos with the Mount Everest background at the Kala Pathar. Mount Everest was only 6 miles away to the east. It was simply amazing. Arriving back at Gorak Shep, we picked up our packs and headed to Labush, where we stayed the day before. We head back to Labush, which was about 2.9 miles, mostly downhill. It was an easy 11th day. Day 12. Trek from Labush to Dingboche via Kongma Pass, 5,519 feet elevation. It was about 9.5 miles with 2,692 feet elevation gain. It was a very nice morning. Yesterday at Gorak Shep, Dee flew back to Lukla due to her low oxygen level at 60. Early in the morning, Wixin's oxygen level was at 60 as well. So his wife Song decided to do a shortcut bypassing the Kongma Pass. I think it was the right decision. My oxygen level has been at mid-80s. 3 of us, Leon, Isaac, and Mani, assistant guide, hit the trail around 0600. Everybody else, guide, 3 porters, Song, and Weixin, went down to Everest Base Camp Trail to Dingboche, bypassing the Kongma Pass. The first 1.7 miles is flat crossing the Khumbu Glacier. Then it gains about 2,600 feet and 2 miles above 16,000 feet altitude. We moved along very well about 2.5 miles. Around 17,000 feet altitude during steep climbing, I was feeling its altitude. I was taking 2 to 4 steps with heavy breathing and could not walk faster. When we got to the pass, we took about 1 hour break since it was a gorgeous bluebird day. At the Kongma La Paz, 18,159 feet elevation. We took out time soaking in the views and resting for about 1 hour. Luckily, this was the only pass had a gorgeous day. Other 2 passes had sleet and snow. We leisurely went 6 miles of downhills to Dingboche. We finished our jaunt in 9 hours. So, we have done all 3 passes and went to the Everest Base Camp. Day 13. Trek from Dingboche to Punki Thanga. It was close to 8.6 miles with 1,028 feet elevation gain and a whooping 4,000 feet elevation loss. It was a little chilly morning, but was a bright blue bird day. Before the breakfast, Leon and I went for a short walk to a hill to check out the Dingboche village and the surrounding mountain views. We hit the trail around 0800. Since it was a downhill in most of time, its distance was not too bad. We could even imagine that Namche Bazaar and Lukla are way down there in the horizon. When we got to the Tiangboche, 12,664 feet, we had lunch and visited Tengboche Monastery. After having a good meal and visiting Tengboche Monastery, we headed down to Punki Thanga, which was all downhill. It was about 2 miles with 1,800 feet elevation loss. There were a group of Chinese trekkers. It was a big crowd, over 30 trekkers. We stayed at Evergreen Lodge in Punki Thanga. It was situated a few hundred yards below the bridge and just above the roaring river. We played Doomball, the Nepalese card game, with the lodge owner till 8 p.m. and turned in early. Day 14. Trek from Punki Thanga to Namche Bazaar. It was an easy day trekking just 4.4 miles with 1,555 feet elevation gain. We had a good breakfast and took out time to leave. It was quite noisy due to the roaring river, but had a wonderful night there with over 8 hours of sleep. Here was our 3 porters and 2 guides. Greeting to the Australian trekkers who had the identical trekking trip with the same dates as us. Its trail is also the closest to the Mount Everest Base Camp, and supposed to be very crowded. We did not see many trekkers coming up. Trail was almost empty at some places. We found out later that it was because the Lukla airport was closed for 2 days due to inclement weather. On the way to Namche Bazaar, we thought about Dee, who flew from Gorakshep to Lukla 2 days ago. If weather was still bad when we get to Lukla in 2 days, our plan was to walk from Lukla to Ramachap. Arriving at Namche Bazaar. Note that starting 1st October, there is no flight from Lukla to Kathmandu, i.e., or vice versa. We flew from Kathmandu to Lukla on 27th September before 1st October. Starting 1st October, Lukla flights are diverted to Ramachap. We stayed at Sakura Guest House in Namche Bazaar. It has a nice hot shower for 500 rupees and free phone charging. Its room was also very nice and roomy. Day 15. Trek from Namche Bazaar to Lukla. Its trek was the longest at 12.3 miles, with 2,751 feet elevation gain, but was mostly downhill, losing 3,500 feet elevation. It was a wonderful Wednesday, 11th of October. Its trek was the longest at 12.3 miles with 2,751 feet elevation gain, but was mostly downhill, losing 3,500 feet elevation. We trekked its exact same route for the first 2 days. Day 1 from Lukla to Manjo and Day 2 from Manjo to Namche. Its trail is the closet to the Mount Everest Base Camp, EBC, and supposed to be very crowded, but was not crowded at all because the Lukla airport was still closed for 4 days due to bad weather. If weather was still bad next day on Thursday, the 12th of October, in Lukla, our plan was to walk and ride a bus or van from Lukla to Kathmandu. We were advised if we start to walk on Thursday, the 12th of October, we can get to Kathmandu on Saturday afternoon on the 14th of October. It was a long 12 miles trekking, but was not strenuous. We rejoined Dee in Lukla, who was stuck there for 4 days. Weather forecast looked descent next day, and our fingers were crossed for next day's weather. This was our last place to spend one night before flying out next day.
Day 16, traveling from Lukla to Kathmandu. We flew from Lukla to Ramchap for 35 minutes, 46 miles, and took a van ride to Kathmandu for 5 hours, 82 miles. It was not a trekking day, but going back to Kathmandu so that we could fly back home. We got up at 0600 and the weather looked really good. Weather forecast looked really good till 1100. Our guide told us to hurry up and need to get to the Lukla airport by 0700. Lukla airport has been closed for 4 days due to bad weather. We were very lucky. We flew from Lukla to Ramchap for 35 minutes, 46 miles, and took a van ride to Kathmandu for 5 hours, 82 miles. Airplane ride was quite smooth. The van ride was quite adventurous and beautiful. There were some beautiful views of rice fields up in high altitude that I forgot to take photos. The unforgettable event was during the lunchtime with the Down Under folks. Its food was burning in flame. Van ride was quite bumpy for 5 hours, but I was thankful and relieved that we safely arrived in Kathmandu. Our trekking trip was completed.
Mahalo for watching. Please subscribe for more Oahu hiking trail guides.